Chapter 91. The disciples of Mount Hua, who were exhausted and on the verge of collapse from running, came to a hurried stop. Unfortunately for them, they happened to stop right as the Chung Sect arrived at the same location. Standing next to the third-class disciples, who were gasping and panting for air, Chung Myung awkwardly tilted his head and looked at Sama Seung. Me? A face that didn't seem to understand anything. Seeing the child's attempt to act innocent, Sama Seung asked again. I asked you, what did you say? Oh, that. Instead of answering, Chung Myung kicked the already staggering Jogul's shin. Fuck you. Do you have a death wish? Can't you run straight? I am your Sayong, you jerk. I forgot for a second there. Chung Myung scratched his head and grinned as he looked at Sama Seung. That must be what you heard. It's so embarrassing. Sama Seung glared at Chung Myung with venom dripping from his gaze. Sama Seung was not stupid enough to misunderstand who those words were directed at. There was no way he would be deceived by a child and his antics. At that moment, someone gently tugged on Sama Seung's sleeve. At this, he stopped himself from speaking and glanced back. It was Chung Myung. Elder, nothing good can come from arguing with a child. Sama Seung sighed and nodded. No matter how angry he was an elder of the Chung Sect. The difference in status was too great for him to speak to a child. If rumors spread that a third-class disciple from Mount Hua and an elder from the Chung Sect engaged in an argument, it would disgrace his name. Chung Myung stepped forward. Who is this young disciple? Who am I? Would you even know if I told you? Chung Myung looked at Chung Myung with blank eyes. He had never before met anyone who answered him with a question like this. Feeling beyond upset, he calmed himself and smiled. Perhaps I might know you, so why don't you tell me? Well, it isn't difficult. I am Chung Myung. Chung Myung. Chung Myung's smiling face immediately went stiff. It was a familiar name. Wasn't Chung Myung the name of the Mount Hua disciple that humiliated the Chung Sect? Chung Myung narrowed his eyes and looked at Chung Myung. He's younger than I thought. He thought it was absurd. Thanks to Chung Myung curing Master Huang, the Eunha Guild severed their relationships with the Chung Sect and began supporting Mount Hua. It was such an embarrassment that the Chung Sect refused to discuss the matter, even more so because Mount Hua was at its center. Thanks to that, the elders and the sect leader were furious. But the one that caused such shame to fall upon the sect was this young child. I see, disciple Chung Myung. But it seems like the disciple Chung Myung never learned proper manners. Although it was an outright rebuke at his attitude, Chung Myung picked his ears and whistled. I'm sorry, but I can't hear you very well. Could you come closer and speak up a bit? What did you say? Are you deaf? Come closer and talk to me. Can't you hear? Chung Myung's face hardened. Just where the hell does this kid's arrogance come from? If what Lee Song-baek said was true, this child was knocked back after one strike. This child had little training in martial arts. What did he believe in that gave him the confidence to speak such nonsense? Unless he was someone with no sense. It made Chung Myung want to pull out his sword and cut down the arrogant child right in front of him. However, this was Mount Hua and not the Chung Sect. He couldn't act carelessly here. This wasn't Chung Myung's role to play. Gnashing his teeth, he tried to speak softly. Aren't you a third-class disciple of Mount Hua? That's right. Mount Hua and the Chung Sect have shared wealth and woe in the past. Since that's the case, and since I am the senior, shouldn't you be the one to come closer to speak? Of course, as long as you have the slightest sense of manners. Ah, really? Chung Myung chuckled. Then why didn't you say that to your elder earlier? If you think that it's more polite for me to come closer to Sasuk, then shouldn't the elder of the Chung Sect be the one going to visit our sect leader? Shit. Aghast, Chung Myung hastily fell silent. He was trying to scold Chung Myung, but this child, used it as an opening to point out Sama-seung's rudeness. I ended up making a mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake. This small child led the flow of the conversation like that, letting Chung Myung stumble onto his mistake and admit his elder's fault. This. At that moment, Sama-seung, who was watching the situation, opened his mouth. This young man's mouth doesn't seem ordinary. Elder, move. Chung Myung, who bit his lip, stared at Chung Myung and then moved back without another word. Sama-seung smiled. Since your actions came from your pure-hearted desire to protect your sect leader's dignity, I won't hold you accountable this time. Yes, thank you, but you had best remember one thing. Your rudeness and mine aren't the same. Do you know why? I wonder. Because of power. Sama-seung spoke in a low voice. It is only when one's actions are pointed out that impoliteness is considered rude. If no one is willing to point it out, it is simply a passing remark. The right to point out such impoliteness comes from power. Your actions are rude because of your weakness, but my impoliteness cannot be considered rude because of my power. Chung Myung frowned. I think you should learn to speak more kindly before worrying about being polite. Seems that you're just a crazy one. Sama-seung turned away from Chung Myung and looked at Hyun-sang. I apologize for the disrespect earlier. Ah, no, elder. Why are you like this? Now that the child pointed out what I did, wasn't I being rude? I need to apologize. Hyun-sang wasn't sure what to do. It was a strange situation where the person who committed the mistake apologized. Yet the person receiving the apology was the one that felt more uncomfortable. Sama-seung smiled and looked back at Chung Myung before speaking. Courage is easy to forgive when you're young. However, one day your actions may cause you to lose your head. Remember my words. With that, Sama-seung turned around. Let's go. Yes, elder. Guided by Hyun-sang, he led the disciples and began walking again. Meanwhile, Lee Song-baek bowed his head to Chung Myung. When Chung Myung returned his greeting with a slight nod, he smiled faintly and walked ahead. As the Jongnam sect disciples moved away, Jogul spoke with a pale face. Have you lost it? What the hell are you trying to do? What? That person is an elder of the Jongnam sect. Jongnam. Elder. Jongnam sect. Yeah. Chung Myung kicked Jogul in the shin again. He struck the same place as before, and Jogul agonizingly clutched his leg as he rolled along the floor. Ugh! Are you a disciple of Mount Hua? Didn't you hear the bullshit he was spouting towards the sect leader? You think we should hold back? Do you think we're enduring because we want to? Yunjong stepped forward with a stiff face. Of course we're angry, but his words are right. A man without power has no right to point out flaws of someone who does have strength. Who said we lack power? Huh? Chung Myung turned his head and looked at the disciples of the Jongnam sect, who were walking away. Those bastards, how dare they? It was annoying that those thieves were brazen enough to walk into Mount Hua on their own feet, but they even dared to insult the sect leader. Even though Chung Myung believes that the current sect leader of Mount Hua lacks the qualifications of a real sect leader, Hyunjong is still Mount Hua's representative, so Chung Myung must protect his dignity from others. For those idiots to insult the sect leader of Mount Hua, Chung Myung's eyes began to blaze in a fury. I tried to be good to them, but those bastards, even in a new life, wants to start fights with me. No, let's calm down. Chung Myung, please, I beg of you. Let's think first and then act, huh? The third-class disciples panicked when they saw the look in Chung Myung's eyes. They all knew they would be unable to do anything if Chung Myung got angry. At that moment, Chung Myung shook his head. Did all the Sayongs get a good look? What? What those bastards are doing, even if they ignored Mount Hua, there is a limit to it. Are Sayongs going to endure everything they say? No, we don't want to tolerate it either. But how do you... Listen well, Sayongs. Chung Myung spoke with eyes that didn't stop blazing. If you lose to those bastards, you will lose everything. The faces of Yunjong and all the third-class disciples went pale. Chung Myung's eyes were spitting flames. You can lose to anyone else. It doesn't matter where you go or who beats you up. Only those Jongnam sect bastards. They're the only ones that you can never lose to, even if you have to die. Anyone who makes me see such a shameful sight had better be prepared. There will come a day where the one who makes others shed tears of blood will shed tears of blood themselves. What you're saying doesn't fit the situation, you brat. It is the other way around for us. You're the one making us cry bloody tears. Why aren't you answering? Chung Myung asked with eyes sparkling in madness. Just the sight made a chill run down their spine. No, we want to do that too, but we... What? We what? Chung Myung approached the third-class disciples with a frightful glare. Are you not confident that you can win? Rather than that, then are you confident enough to die? Let me see a single loss, just one. That's fine, right? Let's all die together. You die and I die too. The Mount Hua and Jongnam Sect Conference, an event that was held to deepen the friendship between Mount Hua and Jongnam. However, now it seems like blood will be spilled because of one person's anger. That little boy. Jong So-han glanced back. Jin Geum-ryung approached him and quietly asked, Are you concerned about him? Jong So-han whispered, making sure that no one else heard him. Rather than being concerned, it feels ridiculous. I don't know where such a kid came from. Leave it alone. Jin Geum-ryung spoke in a stiff voice. It is the privilege of the weak to go wild and crazy without knowing the truth. Only a fool who doesn't know how high the sky is would act so recklessly. That is true, but I have no remorse. He acted arrogantly on his own will. Since we've come here for the conference, there will be plenty of opportunities for us to punish him in the future. I'd love to see if he can still talk like that once I tear off his mouth. Jin Geum-ryung smiled brightly. That isn't something a virtuous disciple should say. He was the one who started this fight. True. To be precise, the Jongnam sect started this fight. But Jin Geum-ryung didn't bother pointing that out. Don't worry about useless things. Sa-ma-seung, who was ahead, spoke in a low voice at that time. In the end, a warrior will always speak with his sword. No matter how sharp his tongue may be, nothing will change. Yes, Elder. Strength isn't everything, but this is a place where nothing can be done without power. You all shouldn't forget that fact. I'll keep that in mind. Sa-ma-seung narrowed his eyes. This time, the conference will be interesting. Seeing them behave so arrogantly, they must have something to believe in. We must be sure to thoroughly trample their beliefs and squash their hope. Do you understand? Yes, Elder. Sa-ma-seung nodded his head with a smile. A very interesting one. Still, it was somewhat commendable. Even the elders of Mount Hua were fearful about speaking against the Jongnam sect. But that young man stepped forward fearlessly. Sa-ma-seung stopped and looked back. The disciples who were following him were startled and halted in place. Elder, what's wrong? Sa-ma-seung, who was staring back with a fear-inducing gaze, soon calmed his expression. No, nothing. It was nothing. The elder then turned around while gently waving his hand. Yet, his face hardened again. Chung Myung clearly pointed out Sa-ma-seung's fault. That meant he had heard how rude he was to Mount Hua sect leader. Then, he heard what I said at the gate from that distance. It was such a great distance that Sa-ma-seung hadn't even known about Chung Myung's existence. No, that can't be right. He must be mistaken. I must have been nervous to think such absurd thoughts. With a low smile, Sa-ma-seung hurried along. However, his steps were a little heavier than before.